Hello, and welcome back to the channel, now in crisp, clear 2021 HD. I hope you all had a wonderful and safe New Year's and all that. Today, we're going to talk about a topic. That topic? DuckTales.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
I really like DuckTales. Specifically the 2017 reboot. Back in 2018 when I got married, we took our honeymoon on a Disney cruise. I don't know if you've ever been on a Disney cruise, but in each room there's a TV that pretty much exclusively just shows Disney content, including the 2017 reboot of DuckTales. So, most of the time when we were back in the room relaxing, we would be watching DuckTales, like most people do on their honeymoons. And I absolutely fell in love with it. Before anyone says it, yes, I am aware that this is a cartoon meant for children. But, as is the case with most things, it is also inherently political. Specifically, when it comes to the politics of one Scrooge McDuck. Did you know that Uncle Scrooge was actually directly inspired by Andrew Carnegie? Like, Carnegie Hall, Andrew Carnegie. Interesting.
Give me a luxury. What luxury should I have?
Private plane.
Larry, I'm on DuckTales.
According to the DuckTales wiki and various other sources, Scrooge McDuck has multiple LinkedIn accounts. Scrooge McDuck's official title is Adventure Capitalist, an obvious play on venture capitalist. According to Investorpedia, a venture capitalist is a private equity investor that provides capital to companies exhibiting high growth potential in exchange for an equity stake. This could be funding startup ventures or supporting small companies that wish to expand but do not have access to equities markets. But if that's a venture capitalist, what is an adventure capitalist? To be blunt, it seems to be someone who adventures to various corners of the world, stealing priceless artifacts, while other people run their actual company back home. Scrooge is the owner of a very successful business, but it's never really made clear what exactly this business does. We know for sure that it has a tech division, but it also seems to have its fingers in seemingly every other industry. The company itself isn't entirely relevant to the adventure capitalist part of Scrooge's wealth, though. To put it more gently, that seems to be the treasure hunting. Rather than investing in promising small business startups, he gets on a plane and steals gold from natives and various other groups. Ooh woo. At least in the reboot, Scrooge and his family do usually end up helping the people living in this various parts of the world in some way or another, to make it look better. It's all about optics. Speaking of optics, Scrooge is the richest duck in the world, at a whopping 1 multiplagillion, 9 obsquatumatillion, $623.62. But where did all this money come from? It's explained that he made his first dime shining shoes, but what about after that? The truth of the matter is that even in the fictitious world of DuckTales, they could not fabricate a multi-plagillionaire whose past does not include the exploitation and abuse of a workforce, with some shady business dealings in the mix for good measure. For example, this panel from an old Donald Duck cartoon featuring Scrooge is damning, to say the least. Now, okay, this is not DuckTales Scrooge, but DuckTales Scrooge has his own problems. For example, the shady deal made with Mr. Z in episode 23 of season 2 that literally guarantees that he will remain the richest duck in the world, hoarding his wealth in a literal money bin, walking all over competitors like Glomgold. We're gonna talk more about Glomgold in the next section of the video. Insider investments, exploiting factory workers, etc. Scrooge has a certain cynicism. Scrooge has a certain cynicism when it comes to ideals of morality in the name of the pursuit of money. But he also exhibits a strong personal code of honesty to keep himself in check. He claims that he's earned his wealth by being tougher than the toughies and smarter than the smarties. Things like the deal with Mr. Z make it apparent that all of his wealth was not earned in the way he so smugly claims it was. He's presented as someone who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, although realistically he's been gliding off the hard work of others, like Gyro or Fenton or even Mrs. Beakley, etc., while he traipses around the world stealing artifacts, much like the reality of billionaires in our world. He's often telling his nephews that they need to earn their own money. Louis establishes Louis Inc. because of this, a faux LLC children's game, on par with Hank Co. from the Venture Bros. Scrooge preaches this while neglecting to acknowledge the fact that he's already given these boys a leg up by granting them access to shelter and technology, etc. Again, very much like the incomplete narratives we're fed about real-world billionaires and how they treat their children. What becomes clear here is that bootstrapping as a consistent means to achieve success is a myth, both in Duckburg and in the real world. See, I told you we'd get to Glomgold, and here you were doubting me. Tisk. Glomgold is Scrooge's primary business rival, along with tech mogul Mark Beeks, who was introduced exclusively for the 2017 reboot. But we're not talking about Mark. We're talking about Glomgold. Although we could talk about Mark, but I don't want this video to get too long. What's interesting here is that Scrooge is actually responsible for kickstarting Glom's career in literally the exact same way his career was kickstarted, by giving Glomgold a nickel for shining his shoes. Glomgold actually mirrors Scrooge in like a lot of ways, but he's presented as a villain where Scrooge is not. The key difference seems to be that personal code of honesty that Scrooge possesses that Glomgold seemingly does not. During the original run of DuckTales, Scrooge tells Glom repeatedly that he'll never be as successful as Scrooge himself because you're a cheater and cheaters never prosper. This is all fine and dandy in theory, but practically, is there really that much of a difference between these two characters, aside from Scrooge seemingly being more competent, educated, and well-spoken? Sure, Glomgold uses more underhanded means to reach his ends, but as we already talked about, Scrooge is not innocent. He just has much better optics. I think, personally, when you actually look at the facts of the situation, Scrooge is only different because of the way he's presented. He's different because his role in the story is that of protagonist, whereas Glomgold's is that of antagonist. Glomgold is Scrooge without the code of honesty or the plot armor. With that in mind, let's talk about another DuckTales antagonist. Let's talk about the Beagle Boys. Another group of reoccurring DuckTales antagonists, inspired by the real-life Barker Carpus gang, a famous Depression-era gang of the same ilk as like Bonnie and Clyde. The biggest inspiration comes from the belief that the Barker Carpus gang was led by the Barker brothers' mother, a woman known as Ma Barker, whereas the Beagle Boys are led by Ma Beagle. I would like to take this time to talk about the class implications of the Beagle Boys, because I'm just completely unhinged, I guess. I can't believe that I'm about to talk about Becker's economic theory of crime in a video about DuckTales, but here we are. The theory was created by Nobel laureate Gary Becker in 1968. The theory basically states that people living in poverty will only commit a crime after comparing the would-be gains with the expected costs of committing the crime. The argument being made is that would-be criminals are acting in an economically rational way. Now, obviously, there are issues with this theory. If crime is the result of a cost-benefit analysis on the part of the would-be criminal, does that mean that the theory is arguing that larger costs, more severe punishments, are the answer to crime? If so, yikes! Also, we all know the economy is a myth. Like unicorns, or Canada. It's clearly very dated, but I think there's a side of it that's relevant to our discussion about the Beagle Boys and the role of class in Duckburg as a whole. Rather than costs, let's look at benefits. According to the theory, a would-be criminal will act if the benefits are high enough. For example, an impoverished family stealing food because the benefit of not going hungry outweighs the cost of possibly getting a criminal record. The Beagle Boys have been repeatedly demonstrated to live in pretty abject poverty. A very large family living in various shacks and junkyards. According to the Becker theory, when they commit a crime, they are acting logically and economically. It's society that has failed them in one way or another, and that failure has led to these crimes. Much like their real-world counterparts acting in the economic hardships of the Great Depression. The society that's failed them? The same one that allows Scrooge to literally hoard his wealth in an actual money bin. Much to think about. For a show about cartoon ducks made for children, I think DuckTales actually has a surprising amount to say about economic inequality and the myth of the kind billionaire, even if it's not intending to say these things. Either that, or I'm thinking about it way too hard. In which case, just don't tell me. It's definitely some propaganda, but propaganda I enjoy. Regardless, the 2017 reboot of DuckTales is a whole-ass bop, and if you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend stealing your friend's Disney Plus login credentials and giving it a go. So this was definitely something. Anyways, I hope you all had a lovely holiday. Thank you all so much for an awesome 2020, at least in terms of channel growth and stuff. 2020 was not awesome, but the channel did good, and that was sick. If you're interested in helping me fund this, I have a Patreon linked below, or I also have some merch if you're more into that. If you liked this video, as always, consider giving it a thumbs up, sharing it, subscribing to the chan, etc., etc. If you didn't like it, that's okay, I guess. Bye! Specifically when it comes to the politics of one's... Oh, burp.